Good afternoon and welcome to Friday of Children's Advocacy Week. We are so excited to have you joining us today. As you know, in many ways, today's session is the culmination of some 20 events this week. And I'm not sure if there could be a more important culminating event. We wanted to spend this afternoon talking about the harsh realities of racial injustice, of institutional racism, and why we as a Commonwealth have to address this if we're ever going to realize the vision that Kentucky is the best place in America to be young. I believe strongly, as do my colleagues, as do our elected leaders who are going to be on this forum, as I hope you do, that as long as the color of a little boy or a little girl's skin in any way forecast outcomes, we as a state are failing. I would like to say just two or three things. I hope we at KYA have always been attuned to this issue. I will say that I think this year, and I want to give my colleagues Cortney and Mahak lots of credit for this. We have applied an intentional lens to every policy on Kentucky's Blueprint for Kids, with the question of its impact around closing those racial disparities. So whether that's in juvenile justice or health, early childhood, or K-12, part of our thinking, part of our communication with legislators has been, here's the implication around racial disparities. And I've got one other hypothesis, and I've got one other challenge. And I certainly will defer to my moderator colleagues and our two leaders in Frankfort. But I do want to just suggest a hypothesis to you, and that is that a lot of the discussion around racial disparities has been around issues of the heart. I've been told I'm not supposed to introduce our panelists. I will tell you that one of those, and it's not Representative Kulkarni, but that other guy, he and I go back probably 30 or 40 years, Gerald, fighting this issue. And so I will tell you, I think the challenge that we face is best described in a 2-minute story about a guy named George Danzig. Now, George Danzig was the guy who literally invented linear programming. I don't even know what that means, but when I read about it, it says that airline schedules and UPS schedules and hospital surgery routines, oil refineries, business revenue projections, all of those are based upon linear programming. So the guy was a really smart cat. But here's the interesting story. When he became famous, was solving two problems that had been labeled as unsolvable. And here's how he did it. His professor at Cal Berkeley had written those problems on the board. George came to class late that day. He just wrote them down, and he thought it was homework. He spent a week, showed up, and he had solved the unsolvable problem. He often reflected that had he been told those were unsolvable problems, he doesn't think he would have ever tried. The thing that most worries me from a pragmatic perspective about issues of racial inequity is I hear way too much talk that it's unsolvable. And I'm here to tell you that I, for one, on a personal and professional basis, believe not only are those issues solvable, they're imperatives. So I don't want you to think about this conversation today as a theoretical one, or even just a politically correct one. I want you to think about today's conversation as a call for action, not just in the future, but in this 2021 session. So that's my appetizer, and now we get to the real pros. I'm delighted that my colleagues, Mahak Kalra and Cortney Downs, are moderating. Again, I've been told I can't introduce our panelists, but if I could, I'd tell them how much I appreciate them being here, how much I respect them, and the tacit agreement that I'm not going to tell you any stories on Senator Neal if he doesn't tell you any stories on me. So, Cortney, take it away.
Thank you, Terry. Hi, everyone. My name is Cortney Downs. I'm one of the policy and advocacy directors at Kentucky Youth Advocates. And like Terry said, I will be co-moderating today with Mahak Kalra, who is our chief policy officer at Kentucky Youth Advocates. And the two of us are really excited and honored to be joined today by Senator Gerald Neal, who represents the 33rd District in Jefferson County, and Representative Nima Kulkarni, who represents the 40th District in Jefferson County. I will go ahead and turn it over to Mahak to get us started.
Thanks, Terry, and thanks, Cortney. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So one of my first questions to you all is, it's safe to say that the nation's growing diversity is not reflected in the state legislature, and there's a lack of legislators of color in Kentucky and nationally. And I want to ask you, who influenced you to run for office, and what drew you to public service?
I'll let Senator Neal start.
You know, I was sitting here thinking that I should defer to my illustrious friend and colleague, Representative Kulkarni, but since she insists, I appreciate that. First of all, thank you for having us in this particular forum. My good friend, Terry Brooks, I won't tell any stories about him. If I did, they would all be good anyway. And then, of course, Courtney and Mahak, thank you so much for welcoming and giving a framework to express. The question goes back to, you know, why am I doing what I do? In the particular, I guess, what led me in this path? Well, you know, when I thought about that a little bit, and I think about it a lot. In fact, I think about it almost every time I get challenged or when I have a very difficult issue before me. And all of a sudden, once I figure it out, the challenge sort of evaporates, because really I'm on a path that I did not necessarily choose. I think I was trained to do what I do. I think that I think this has become who I am. I'm not trying to strike a home run, because I know there are no home runs to hit, but I do know that purpose in life and those things that you can do from where you are and what you do with it is what life is all about. So I was raised that way. I was raised to engage the community, and the motivating forces and molding forces in my life primarily were my mother and my father. My father was a union activist. It was very much community oriented. My mother the same. And it seemed like sort of a natural thing for us to take the next step, but not only in the community. And that also translated into struggles. For instance, the civil rights struggles. You know, at the time, I probably felt that, oh man, this is fun on one level, although I was feeling fear on another level, because I got arrested 11 times when I was in the civil rights movement back in those days. But that movement went on to other movements. And I must say that in that movement, I was influenced not only by the icons of the period, but came to know some of the icons, or at least be in the room with some of those icons locally and nationally when I was very young. So they had an influence on me. And then, you know, I went on to college, of course, and there I naturally got involved into the student movement, and was very much involved in that, and took some leadership in that particular regard. And from there, I jumped into the national movement of one of the organizers, elected the first board of the Black American Law Students Association, for instance. And that sort of put me into a lot of other people's wheelhouses. And I met so many people that were brilliant people that were totally committed. And it was a way of life. It was a natural fit. And the passion and commitment was tremendous. And ultimately, I became an attorney. And in that, I began to apply some of the things that I learned as an attorney, a lot of it not for money. If it related to the community, it wasn't for money, for instance. So it was sort of one of the things that went along with me. I became a leader in the community in various respects, supported people in the community until I began to think, well, maybe I have something to contribute here. So when the opportunity presented itself, ultimately I ended up being a state senator. This is the only office I've ever held. It's the only office I've ever been elected to. And I really had planned to come for about 4 years because I was busy doing some other things. And now I'm in there over 30 some odd years. I question that, and I guess some other people might question it as well. But the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of people influenced me along the way, but the pathway was really established by my parents and my siblings. And all of us sort of did these kinds of things. I'll stop right there. I could go on and on. You should never ask me that question.
Well, we love hearing it, and I appreciate that. Representative Kulkarni?
Yeah, and I will echo a lot of what Senator Neal said with regard to his parents laying the pathway. I was born in India, and my parents moved us to Louisville, Kentucky, right? So we didn't start out in New York or California or anything, right to Louisville, because my brother had learning disabilities. And so there's a DePaul school in Louisville that he was able to attend. And my dad had heard about this in India. He had met Sister Ann Rita, so there's just a whole lot of odd connections that we had with Louisville, and that's how we ended up here. So I actually literally would not be sitting where I am if my parents had not made that decision. And that decision was really to make sure that my brother and I had all the opportunities in life that were possible. We didn't come here sort of for economic benefit. My dad had a good job. My parents were both educated. So they actually left behind a lot of stuff to start over in Louisville. And back when we moved, they couldn't find a job. No, there was no help. They have degrees, they spoke English, but there was just nothing they could do. And so they bought a grocery store, which is actually located in Representative Reggie Meeks' district. And it's still there. The building is still there. It's called 8 to 8, and it was a little corner grocery. We had, canned foods, and there was a deli. My parents don't know anything about groceries. They didn't know how to slice deli meat or vegetarian. It was just, there was no subject matter expertise at all. But it was a way to start building something, right? So they couldn't find jobs. They just built something up, so they could put food on the table. And so I kind of grew up with that mentality. And this is something that, most immigrant families will have a similar story to tell about how you kind of came here and built your life up and built your life for your kids and tried to provide for them the best that you could. And so that I just, from a very early age saw that work ethic and also that fearlessness that you can really just do whatever you want to do if you put your mind to it. Don't be afraid of something that you may not be familiar with or that you may not be comfortable with, because anything is possible. And I think that this focus on education also, carried through because that was just kind of expected. We came here so that we could have opportunity, educational opportunity. And so I also became an attorney. So that, and it kind of, is similar to Senator Neal's path, where I never planned to run for public office. Politics was not at all something that was like, I grew up in America and I was like, one day I'm going to be president. Like, that's not the road or the path that my mind was taking me. I initially wanted to be, a short story writer in Ireland, a very strange and specific, plan. But that was, I had a really great English teacher in high school. And so I became an English major. So it, a lot of influences in my life came through education. So whether it was high school or college, I went to a very progressive law school. So not a whole lot of, tax law or corporate law, but a whole lot of social justice work and a whole lot of community legal clinics. And so that really showed me that, you can be an attorney, but it doesn't always have to be about making partner. It doesn't always have to be about billable hours. It can be about helping the community and be able to give back, which is also something that I saw my parents do, even when we didn't have a whole lot. That was always something that they tried to do, help people, even if a little bit, like give them a little bit of money, a little bit of food, any way they could. So I think that starting with my parents, really the fundamental things that I learned were, hard work, fearlessness, and a real strong sense that you have an obligation to give back to your community, wherever that community may lead you.
That's fantastic. And I love hearing the parallels a little bit and the similarities in your upbringing and your experiences as well. As a person of color, it's really great to see legislators of color to show the diversity of our community. Can you talk about what your, excuse me, what your experiences have been like as a person of color serving in the legislature?
Well, that's a mixed bag. Well, first of all, the environment, a lot of people don't get it, but the environment of legislating is a very difficult environment itself. In fact, the process was made up to be difficult on purpose. It was designed so it would slow down enough, but have enough doors open so there'd be input from diverse opinions and spaces under a particular jurisdiction, coming together in one place to make decisions about policy that could affect all people in that jurisdiction. So it's a very difficult situation on top of it. So it's difficult sometimes to separate that from the racial piece, the overlay or undercurrent that you get when, at least in my observation, when I went into that environment. On the other end of it, though, I was well prepared. My parents, I came out of a generation where the parents specifically prepared you for the challenges of race, specifically challenged you to be not good, but twice as good, specifically instilled, a don't quit particular piece. And the one that's the most hardest to manage is to maintain an ear. That's probably the most difficult thing for a person to do, particularly when your value systems get challenged. So you have to look inside. So those kinds of things help me navigate, but notwithstanding that, almost day one, I was right in the middle of it. I remember going down to Frankfort and the Senate chambers were empty and they weren't having session at the particular time. And I was sort of reminiscing upon what was happening here. My God, I'm here, I'm in the center of government, and what an honor, what a privilege has been bestowed upon me. I must meet this challenge. And so I went and sat in my little seat that was set for me. And once I sat down, here comes the doorman, some guy out of nowhere, and says, "What are you doing here?" Well, I didn't, I said, "Well, I just came to sit in the seat, He said, "Well, you can't be here." Well, see, I could have taken that both ways. He had a responsibility to secure the Senate chambers. On the other hand, here I was, an African-American, this big white guy coming up to me, challenging a space that I had a right to be in. So I just led one question to the other and finally got to the end. And basically, he backed off without me even raising a question. And then he saw me in the chamber and profusely apologized, et cetera, and we became great friends. I tell that story because that's how mixed and ingrained and entwined the interaction is because of racial issues and the challenges of life and challenges of navigating whatever you have to be. However, I have to say that what I've observed through this process up to now, including now, is a lack of racial congruency in terms of perceptions about what's going on. Varying levels of commitment. In fact, denial has been something that I've confronted throughout life. You say yes, it's an automatic no. It's not even, it's that ear thing. There's no, your value systems are challenged and that sort of thing. So it takes a lot of discipline, not just to navigate that system, but a lot of discipline to deal with people that that have been socialized differently. I wouldn't go to the point of saying racist. I would say racially challenged. that part of your responsibility is to navigate that, but every chance you get, try to educate and bring that person along. That's been a continuing effort and a balancing act since I've not only in life itself, but as a legislator in the Kentucky legislature.
Representative Kulkarni, do you want to jump in?
Sorry, had to unmute myself. Yes, yeah. It's been a very interesting experience being in Frankfort. I think that, you know, folks a lot of times don't know what to do with me because I'm not Black and I'm not white, you know, and that in Kentucky and for a lot of folks in the US, that's the disparity. You're either Black or you're white. You know, you have in recent years, certainly this growing, well, you're Mexican. And like anybody that looks Hispanic or speaking Spanish is Mexican. And so there is, you know, there is a lot to be said about what Senator Neal alluded to in terms of making every conversation and education, you know, if the person is not understanding something really fundamental about your culture or your background. And that's something that takes a lot of patience, but I think is very rewarding, you know, so it's not about correcting people that can't pronounce my last name, which this was a huge deal in my campaign. We were like, do we even want to put my name on a yard sign? Like, let's just stick with Nima. It's 4 letters. It's easy to remember, you know, but that's not how it appears on the ballot. So you can't just leave it at that. But, you know, these sorts of little considerations, because you're worried about how somebody else who is not familiar with you or your background or your experience, how they're going to react. And I think that, you know, my district, for instance, has very few immigrants in it. There's no Indian people, there's no South Asians. I represent the University of Louisville, which has a lot of foreign students and a lot of faculty that are from different countries, but they can't vote for me because they live somewhere else. And so, you know, it was interesting just canvassing the districts because we were, you know, we're talking about a very diverse demographic, a lot of older folks, a lot of older white folks, a lot of older Black folks, a lot of young people, younger professionals. There's pockets where folks are sort of doing okay and pockets where people are really not doing well, that are needing a lot of help to survive. And really, it was about me showing up and saying, look, I want to help. I can't promise you that I'll be able to do this, this, and this, but I want to help and I want to listen to whatever it is that is holding you back, you know, or whatever it is that you're confused about or have some concerns about. And that's really what it was. They didn't care about my name. They didn't care about where I came from. There were times where folks confused me for a canvasser for the actual candidate. I was like, nope, it's me. I look different in the mailer because they made me, you know, I was all made up then and I wasn't made up at your door, but it's me. But I think that's essentially what you have to do, is find some way of connecting with everybody that you talk to. That's constituents, that's legislators, that's, you know, lobbyists, anybody. And you have to find some common ground to start that conversation with. And once you get to that point, the conversation flows a lot easier, the relationships get built, bridges get solidified. And I think that's my goal, certainly as a legislator, is to make sure that I pass bills, that I get something done for my district. And I agree with Senator Neal that is sometimes challenging on a daily basis when you're confronted by you know, legislation you might not agree with, people you might not agree with, but you've got to remember, bottom line, why you're there. And so that's really helped me focus, you know, how I approach people.
Thank you for your transparency, both of you all, and the key words of discipline, patience, and common ground, because I think that's what we always strive at KYA, is finding that common ground and being persistent. So thank you for that. So switching gears, I wanted to ask about just data, really. And, you know, Kids Count is a cornerstone project of Kentucky Youth Advocates. And after reviewing the Kids Count data indicators on race equity, what stands out to you based on what you see in your community?
If I may, 2 things jump out very strong. The impact of poverty and what it does to individuals. And when you see it in the statistical framework, you're thinking, this is the collective. This is the disparity that we talk about using words like that. But poverty actually makes the bed for the outcomes that ultimately negatively impact individuals in varying degrees, depending on their opportunity, their vision of what they think they can do and not do, and those very real things that inhibit their ability to do things that you would expect that anyone could do. But the fact of the matter is, there's no such thing as anyone can do in America. That's part of the myth. You know, part of the great thing is that you can be anything you want to be, but the reality is you can't. Not when you look at the whole piece, and poverty and lack of opportunity. And the second thing is the systemic nature of it. In this sense, we're talking about race. There's also a class component. But that race and class component, since racism as it was born American style and shot back around the world, is a different animal. It's not class. It's class intermingled with race. And the fact of the matter is you can't separate one from the other now, because what you'll find in that piece is the inherent disparity of those folks because of our racial history, our racial attitudes, concepts of white supremacy, and mix that with, I'm trying to make it in the world and you got it and I don't have it. And my God, you come and try to solve something. Why are you giving those people money? You're not giving it to me. It just all gets all mixed up. So when I look at it, and I really have a problem when people respond in a denial sense that there's no such thing as quote unquote systemic racism. There's no question that we live in, motivated by, suppressed by, encouraged, doors are open, doors are shut in a system. The question is who gets the opportunity, who opens those doors, who is in the position to make these things happen. And if I said it in a collective way, I would say that you find, as it relates to kids counts and those types of measures or observations that are made statistically and otherwise, that poverty is where this focus has to be. We have to figure out how to not only alleviate the pressures and create pathways for people on the ground, but we also need to make sure that our strategic application of our efforts are pointed to empower individuals. You can hand something over and somebody needs something to hand over at some point, no question. But if you don't empower them, if the strategic piece is not to empower, because you can't deal with every individual situation, they have to have the strength and the ability and the leverages to do things for themselves. So I would say those two things.
Thank you. Representative?
Yeah, I think Senator Neal, hit the nail on the head, and I had circled, right? You had sent the key indicators, and children in poverty, back in 2013 was 25.5%. We're at 22.3%, so it hasn't really gone down a whole lot. Children in low-income families, 49 to 46% change, and then kindergartners ready to learn, 50 to 51%. And those numbers, I think, tell a really important story, and it's the same story that Senator Neal alluded to. I think it's very important to note, and I try to talk about, I'm an immigration attorney, and so I try to talk about the history of immigration in this country because a lot of people don't know, and certainly immigrants don't know the history of the immigration system, which, to Senator Neal's point, was one of the systems that was built on racism. I would not be able to be in this country at all. My parents would not have been able to move to Louisville, Kentucky, had it not been for the Immigration Act of 1965, which was signed, as a follow-through to the Civil Rights Act, which none of those laws would have been in place or been in existence without all of the civil rights movements, without all of the protests and all of the Black lives that were, put on the line. People that died for this. And I think it's really, really important to know that and understand sort of the burden and the obligation, because you have a lot of immigrants that come here and we don't have to deal necessarily, for instance, in my case, because I'm not a Black immigrant, don't have to deal with the systems, the racist systems that have been put in place, because, and how could they not be inherently racist? They were put in place, right? As somebody who is a dominant race trying to suppress another race. And so every system, our economic system, our educational system, our housing system, how people get food, how they get to work, how they walk, can they walk somewhere, bicycle somewhere, do they need a car, public transportation? I mean, all of these things were designed for a specific purpose. And the purpose was not to lift everybody up and provide equal opportunity to everybody. And so it is really important for immigrants to join that, in that knowledge and understanding of why they're here. If you're a Black or brown immigrant in the United States, it's because of the civil rights movement. And it's really important that we understand that, even if we ourselves are not feeling the brunt of all of the systematic racism that the Black community has been feeling since the beginning, since the founding of this country. So I think that poverty, there's a reason for it. I think that, kids not being able, ready to learn at a young age. I think all of those are just symptoms, because if we have the will, if we have the political will in Kentucky today, we could fund education, we could fund public transportation, we could figure out renewable energy sources, we could do all of these things. There's a reason we don't, and that reason is exactly what Senator Neal said. There's the concept that there's only one small pie and everybody has to fight over one crumb of that pie, instead of working together to grow the pie, which is the only thing that we should be focused on. And I think that the only way we can do that is to dismantle, and I know Senator Neal has been at this for a long time, so I'm using these words like, let's just dismantle these systems. But I mean, it's an ongoing struggle, and I know that it's overwhelming. But there's no way to get out of these and get these indicators to where they should be if we don't, address the core system that created them.
I really appreciate listening to you all talk about the systemic nature, how all of these issues are inextricably linked. And I understand that the question that I'm about to ask may be a very difficult one to answer, but are there solutions, are there policies that you think your peers should consider to try to start chipping away at these issues and seeing better outcomes with these indicators?
Well, let me say, we offer a plethora of options and lay them before our colleagues that are rarely entertained. I want you to understand, it's not like the issues have not been put on the table, but at the same time, there have been some things that have been entertained, such as CURA, the Kentucky Education Reform Act. It offered a tremendous opportunity. Has not been perfect. Even within that system, the way people do their business, they undermine the intent, and that struggle for primacy in a particular situation or not still exists, even within that. But it offers a better opportunity than what we have. It has opened up doors. It lays the framework down to challenge those things that do not work well. That would include those things that would provide equity and opportunity for our young people and so forth. So that's a big thing. And I when I see people, I remember when we started doing this thing, people try to undermine that. Now that's a big structural thing. That was a systemic change there that enabled that. That was very important. I think there are other things that we've done that I think are important, but I think we've been less aggressive about it. If you look at our criminal justice system, we did criminal justice reform not so long ago. We really just picked and pecked at it. We picked and pecked at it because those people on the majority side began to feel the pressure of, I'm paying for this system because I'm not doing this or that or the other. So they had to now go back, some of my colleagues included, to say, okay, now how do we manage this? How do we keep these costs under control? They weren't thinking about, here's a disproportionate number of black folks in prison. Here's some black children that are in the pipeline that's going to end up in prison. They're not talking about we took the individuals that dealt with the juveniles off the streets and put them behind desks, and now we didn't have the engagement that we needed. They weren't talking about disproportionate contact and the disparities in that of African Americans. They weren't talking about what was happening in our streets. In fact, they were resistant and did not understand, for instance, that this is not anti-police, because police need what? The community, and the community needs what? The police. This whole different way of thinking. But we've made some incremental progress in these particular areas. So let me sum it up by saying this. This is a very complex piece because there's so many aspects to it, and so many, it's multifaceted, it's multifaceted. But there's also this. I've come to believe that unless not only government, this is going to take government and the business community, corporate community, I'll phrase it as, they're going to have to come to grips with this. It's to their benefit to not only raise this in terms of priority, but to be very intentional about the outcomes that we need to make as a whole society and what it means to have an inclusive society that's based on justice. You know, justice is a very liberating experience, quite frankly, for society, not let alone an individual. So let me just close it by saying on my part here is that we're gonna have to be very intentional, and we're gonna have to have strategies of empowerment. I can't say that enough. It's gonna translate in different ways, but we have to have strategies of empowerment. Those with the wherewithal are gonna have to make some decisions about why it's beneficial to them, because I gotta tell the story, I tell it all the time. A little wino once, and wino is a disparaging term, I wanna withdraw it, but I'm using it because at the time, that's what they meant to demean someone that was ill, quite frankly. But this was a weak person that was out of their mind, and they just let alcohol take them. Now we know better, right? We know it's an illness, basically. But at that time, he came to me, and I couldn't understand why my father, who ultimately owned a liquor store, by the way, and I was there on a weekend one evening, and he came in, it was just me and he looked at me, and he always dressed up, but it was always raggedy kind of dress. But my father always deferred to him. I couldn't figure it out. So finally he came in and he said, "Neal, you just don't know what you're doing." And I'm saying, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. Why don't I know what I'm doing?" He said, "Because you haven't figured out that no one's gonna follow you or do what you think should be done unless they know what they can get out of it." That is a very key thing. Society has a vested interest in dealing with the issues that are raised by kids counts and the initiatives that you have, racism in our society, the disparities, the wasted energy, the wasted capacities that we have. They have a vested interest in that. And those with the wherewithal are the ones that can make the major changes if they come to understand that this is a win-win proposition. We can overcome this. So I'm gonna stop there because I can go on and on with this discussion, but I gotta tell you, we have to be intentional about that. But the major constructs, those with the capacity, those with the girth in the society must say, this is important, and we must elevate this, and we should sustain this over time, and we should incorporate that with principles of fairness, justice, and equity. After all, isn't that what this country was founded upon?
He's a tough act to follow.
I'm gonna get you going first next time. That's
I made a mistake. No. I think that is exactly right. And I think, you know, something that we can look at all of this through the lens, right, of our kids. When you look at juvenile justice, when you look at food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation, again, childcare, all of these issues lend themselves to a gap, increasing the gap, you know, if it's a racial divide, an economic divide, whatever the disparate outcomes are, that's what leads to these outcomes where kids aren't ready to learn, kids don't graduate, kids are in poverty. When you don't invest in kids, and honestly, maybe that's just the right way, the only way to keep framing it, invest in their education, invest in making food available to them, invest in making sure that they're able to get secondary education, that their parents are able to work and they get childcare. I mean, these are not radical ideas. These are not impossible ideas. There just needs to be a will. And as Senator Neal said, there are plenty of proposals that have been put on the table year after year. And regardless of who's in the majority, who's not in the majority, I mean, we see this on a federal level. Congress is, I don't know who thinks Congress is getting anything done on either side, really. And it's very easy to get disillusioned. But I think that the work has got to be done. And if you frame it that way, if you just invest in kids, what do kids need? Because as adults, they're going to need the same things, right? And if you want them to survive and thrive as adults, you want to make sure that you're able to give them what they need at an early age, as early as you can. And so that's how you have to look at any legislative proposal. I think it's easy to abstract things like, oh, this is the tax rate for this. And like, it's not tied to any outcome or any goal or objective or impact on a community. And so it's just a number that's floating out there that economists can argue about. And that's what happens to a lot of legislative proposals. I think if you start from, here's the outcome that we want, here's the reality that we want to achieve, hopefully that leads to better policies. I'm nearer at this than Senator Neal, so we'll see. Probably a little bit more optimistic.
Well, it seems like you attended our internal blueprint team meetings is what I'm gathering. There might be a little bug that we need to take care of, but we're lucky to have you as a champion and Senator Neal. And so just to be mindful of time, I do want to end with one question, and I'll turn it over to Representative Kulkarni first, and then we can flip the order this time around. How about that? What do you hope advocates take away from this conversation?
I hope that what advocates take away from this conversation is that you do have champions, right? You have people that are willing to listen, that are willing to advocate for policies that will impact Kentucky's kids in a beneficial way. And certainly, the more you can add to that number, the more hopeful advocates should be that something might get done, even if it's incremental, even if it's not sort of major systemic changes. One bite of the elephant at a time. And so I think certainly this whole week, this whole program that you've had is amazing. You've had, bipartisanship, you've had a lot of folks agreeing on a lot of things when it comes to our kids. And I think that is hopeful. I think it's encouraging. And I think what advocates should take away from this is, keep going. We're here to support you wherever we can.
I'm going to have to fold right in on the last statement that Representative Kulkarni said. Keep going. Do not quit. That's the name of the game. Keep in mind that you're right in the midst of battle, if you want to phrase it that way. But this is a continuum. This is a story of life. This gets down to the purpose of your existence. And the fact of the matter is that it is a just cause. And the fact of the matter is, it is a highly elevated cause. And even though someone else may not be able to see, the fact that you see and have committed yourself to it has just, you solidified your place in history. Don't quit. Keep on going. That's the name of the game. You will win in the end, as an individual and collectively as a society.
Thank you so much, Senator Neal. I really can't wrap it up any better than that. Thank you both, really, Senator Neal, Representative Kulkarni, for giving us your time today. Personally, I could have talked to the two of you for another hour. This was just fantastic. It really was. And thank you so much for everything that you all are doing for Kentucky kids and Kentucky families.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.